I've developed a bit of a reputation for trying to find the cheapest, decent quality HD action camera. And for that reason, a lot of people get in touch with me and suggest certain cameras that I should take a look at. Now, there's one name that came up more than any other in my inbox over the last few months, and that's the Monoprice MHD. Now, the Monoprice MHD is actually just a rebadged Iron Air Pro with a bit of a paint job. Now, that wasn't what was putting me off it. The fact is, it's not that cheap in the UK. You see, if you go and get it from Monoprice in America, get it imported, pay for the postage, pay for the import duty and the VAT, it ends up coming to about $160 or the equivalent, which is 100 British pounds, which isn't that cheap really. Now, recently I managed to find one on Amazon. Monoprice opened up a little shop on Amazon UK and was selling it for £61. Well, that seemed a lot more reasonable, so I've gone ahead and got one. Here it is. Let's have a look at it and see if it's actually even worth £61. Well, the box it comes in to start with is one of these sort of plasticky, squeezy things. It's not a rigid box. It's quite neat, though. It looks quite nice. It's a traditional way of doing this now. You get the camera in the top in a clear bit, and then in the bottom bit you get all the different bits and pieces that come with the camera. Now, this camera comes with a few little bits and pieces. You can get others as well, of course, but it's enough for your average cyclist to get up and running. Of course, you will need to add a micro SD card to this, class 6 or above recommended. Let's have a look at some of these things, or all of them, as quickly as we can really. First off, we've got this little clip here that attaches to the bottom of the camera and screws into the standard tripod screw thread on the bottom. Now you can screw it in with this little sort of metal thing that looks like a guitar puck, but that's just for twisting that bit there if you don't have a coin for some reason. But you can also twist it with that as well, so not entirely necessary. But anyway, we've got the plastic bit on the bottom of the camera now. That clips into the handlebar mount like this, as you can see. And the handlebar mount's one of those ones with a ball joint on it and a nut that can be tightened up to get it pointed in quite a few different directions. And it slides out of there pretty easily. The other things in there, we've got this little tether so you can attach it to the camera, stop it falling off things, I suppose. You've got a USB A2 mini B lead, just a standard mini B, not a micro B or anything like that. And there's this little neoprene pouch that if you put the camera in that, when you're carrying it around, you won't scratch the lens. Now let's look at the camera itself. Well, first off, all the bits and pieces that you need to get to are inside the back here. Slide the lock switch up and then twist it left to get the back off. Right, at the top of that we've got a micro HDMI, a micro SD card slot. To the left of that, full HD and HD switch there to switch between the two, a reset hole, USB plug for charging, and an LED light in there as well. Put the back on. As you can see, we just flip that lock switch down. That stops it twisting off by accident. Now on the bottom, I mentioned before, we've got a standard tripod screw thread with one of those locator plugs next to it. And at the back, that's where you put that little tether lead through. On the front, rather obviously, that's going to be the lens. And on the top, this is the way it's operated. There's two switches on here. The back one's a slider. Slide it forwards, it turns the camera on and starts recording immediately. It takes about 2 seconds to get up and running. There's also a vibration motor in this camera, which you can hear when I switch it on and off. There's an LED at the front there as well. So I'll just switch it off. You see, you get the two buzzes when it goes into standby, which it's in now. The green light's lit, and from there we can flip it on. Start it recording again. Records quite a bit quicker this time because it hasn't gone from off, and now it's back in standby again. And we can also take a picture by pressing the button at the top, and it just takes a picture like that. Or if you want, you can actually get the camera to turn off. You can either wait for it to turn off after 2 minutes or press and hold the button on the top, and that switches it off as well. And the only thing left to mention is that the camera's got an orientation sensor. That means you can mount the camera upside down and the video that you record will come off it the right way up. Now, it only remembers the orientation it was in before you start recording. If you flip it during recording, it doesn't affect it at all. Now, let's look at the specs for the camera. They're on screen now. I suggest you pause this if you want to look at these in any greater detail, but it records in 1080p and 720p at 30 frames a second, H.264 MOV file formats. It's got about a 2.5-hour battery life, and the weights and dimensions and things are on the screen at the bottom there as well. Anyway, it's time to have a look at some sample footage. Now during the course of these videos I'm going to be flipping between 720 and 1080. Notice at the top right this is a 1080p clip, and in a second it's going to be a 720p clip. And the reason I'm doing that is to show you the difference in the field of view between the two resolutions. You can see 720 is quite a bit wider. I think it's 120 degrees. I'm not too sure what 1080p comes out as. Now notice it's a bit too dark down the bottom here. And of course it's the same in 720p, it doesn't affect it as far as that goes. The camera has a tendency to underexpose. Now let's go indoors. Just look at the back there, at the bottom where it says Lush and Fossil. You can make out those signs. It's quite clear, but again it's a bit dark. But in 720p you can't make out those signs at all. Of course there should be a difference between 720 and 1080, but 720 is pretty soft in this camera. Now let's go in a darker area. This is indoors, it's in the Printworks. You can see that there's quite a bit of grain on screen and things get a little bit blurry when I swing the camera around, but I'll be honest, it's no worse than a lot of other cameras that I've tested in the past. It does a reasonable job in these conditions. Now, somewhere like this, where it's nice and bright and sharp and clear, it actually looks pretty decent. If all the footage looked like this, I'd be pretty happy with this camera. But it's just the fact that when you get into sunny areas, it tends to get a little bit too dark in the areas that aren't sunny. Now let's just again have another look at those 720p and 1080p comparisons. So that's 1080p there, and that's 720p. You can see how 720p could come in useful for certain situations to get a wider angle. Now I like filming in this area because the sun's behind me and it always lights up everything in front. There's always lots of people walking around. I mean, there's a chap here now who's learning how to walk by watching a YouTube clip on his mobile phone. Seems to be doing quite well so far. Let's look at him in 720p, yeah that's right. Left, right, left. Yeah, I think he's got it. Pretty good. But other than that, nice and sharp, clear, but a little bit dark. As you can see from the Woo-Sang here, the colours on this camera are actually quite vibrant. It's just that the brightness needs turning up a notch or two. Now let's have a listen to the sound quality, because that's another issue entirely. Yes, the sound on this camera is horrible, and it doesn't make a jot of difference whether the cap is removed off the back of the camera or not. The sound is still terribly muffled. Now let's go and do something that the camera's more designed for. I've attached it to my motorcycle using an ultra clamp, and let's have a look at some of that footage. Now this is more like it. The camera seems to be doing a good job. Maybe things look a little bit better when you're moving along at speed rather than when you've got time to analyse everything. However, when you drive into the sun with the camera, things do get a little bit dull and sort of bleached out, as they would with any camera. But turn away from the sun, get the sun behind you like I've got it now, shining in the right direction, and everything tends to look really good. Now it's not the best I've ever seen, but it's perfectly acceptable, and for the price, not bad at all really. Now all the footage you've seen so far was in 1080p, so I thought I'd pull into Costco and change the resolution, buy a couple of things while I was there as well. Also a couple of people pulled out in front of me. That van came across a giveaway sign there, and then this Mercedes just pulled out in front of me because we thought that would be a good thing to do. So anyway, I managed to make it surprisingly in one piece, so I can pop in there, go and get myself a bottle of whiskey, down it, and when I come out I'll be driving like everyone else in the car park. But I just want to show you the different fields of view. That was 1080, this is 720. You can see it's quite a bit wider, and let's just set off again and have a look at some 720p footage. Now when the sun's in the right position like it is now, you can see the shadow of the bike on the road. Things look pretty good again in 720p. In fact, pretty decent. But when you get the sun like this, which is meaning there's a shadow across the road, I'd say that this footage isn't really usable. So really, you definitely need the sun to be in the right position to get decent quality footage out of this camera. Let's look at some photos that I took with the camera. I took a few photos while I was out and about. First thing is, of course, it's a bit difficult to hold the camera straight, as you can see, but it is nice and sharp. I'm sure you could read the Caribbean food sign there. Now, there is a noticeable fisheye effect, of course. We're using the full 4:3 ratio sensor here, but it's a bit bulgy at the edges. Now, it does do burst photos like this. It takes 3 photos in quick succession. It's a little bit tricky though, because you press the button, it buzzes, and then it takes the 3 photos. So it's quite easy just to move the camera away thinking you're finished, and you've just got a lot of blurry photos of the floor. Now let's look at the settings for the camera. When you plug it into the computer, you get this menu up here. Well, there's a little bit of software. You click on it, you get this. There's one for Windows, one for Mac. But these are the things that you can change on the camera. As you can see there, 5 megapixels or whatever for the stills. Now it's a 5 megapixel sensor, so just leave it in 5 megapixels. No need for me to describe all the different things there. I think they're all self-explanatory. Now, if you want to change the time on the camera, that's pretty easy as well. You just go into this menu here and sync it with the computer. Now, it doesn't overlay the time on the display, but it just means that the files have the right timestamp on them. Now, if you've got your own HDMI micro to full-size lead, you can plug this thing into a television and you can do a couple of neat tricks. First one is you can actually get into the setup menus from there, and using a weird combination of double tapping the button, holding the button down for a long time, or tapping it quickly, you can get through those and change the settings. It takes some getting used to though. It's a very fiddly process, but at least it does it if you haven't got access to a computer or something. Of course, you've got to supply your own HDMI lead. Now, it does have live video out in standby and whilst the camera's recording. Again, just through that micro HDMI. There's no phonos out or anything from this camera. Other things you can do while you got it plugged into your television, you can of course play back photos and videos you've recorded before. Notice you've got a bit of on-screen information on top of them there though, but it does disappear after a second, which is quite nice. And finally, you can delete files off the camera using these menus as well. Now, I do have a few issues with the camera. The first one is this. If you put it on a flat surface, it won't rest flat, it points downwards, which is a bit annoying. The video quality is too dark in quite a lot of situations, which is disappointing. And the cap on the back can be very tricky to get back on sometimes because it kind of twists around inside. I like the controls on the camera, they're nice and simple and easy to understand. And I also like the fact it has a standard tripod mount on the bottom. So there's some positives and negatives. On the positive side, it's got the standard tripod mount, it's got that vibration feature which is good, it's very easy to use, and it's an all-in-one device. You don't need to put it in a waterproof case or anything like that. I always prefer cameras where if you're just carrying it around, you've got everything you need. You don't have to carry around all accessories. However, on the negative side, it does have disappointing video quality at times. It's got terrible sound. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. That fiddly cap I mentioned and the fact it can't stand flat aren't big deals, but I thought I should mention them anyway. So whether you want a Monoprice MHD or an Iron Air Pro for that matter is up to you. I don't think I'd recommend this one. And besides, there's new irons out now, so I'd imagine very soon those will be rebadged as the new Monoprice MHD 2 or whatever they want to call it. Oh, and I should quickly mention that I'm not going to be uploading any samples for this one. I don't think it's worth it in this case. But as always, for the moment, thanks for watching.